Just because it was old and forgotten about doesn't mean it wasn't a good time. I am the Game Collector and this is Second Opinion Games, and today we do a Vectrex Showcase.
Second Opinion Games.
The Vectrex was an interesting little console coming out in 1982 and quickly discontinued. There is only a handful of games ever released for it, but the games that did come out were rather innovative and capable of bringing arcade experiences right into your home. Take a look at Armored Attack, for example. Yes, this is running on an emulator because trying to record the Vectrex screen itself is rather difficult in general, and this even shows its overlay, which was very important for bringing some type of color to the games that you would play. And notice that the graphics here look pretty much what like 1982 graphics look like in the arcade. The sound effects are pretty bad, so you could barely even hear it, but even if you had the volume turned up on your Vectrex itself slightly higher than it should be, you would hear a heck of a lot of buzzing sound because of the improper shielding. Overall, this game plays quite well. Let's jump over to the arcade version where I don't have any overlay. See, the arcade version actually had an overlay built into the screen itself, so you could see where the different spots were where you could not go or could not shoot through. So emulating this is just something you can't do, meaning that the Vectrex has the best version of this game out there for home play. Bedlam is a game that I like to think of as reverse Tempest. Instead of moving around the outside, instead you're in the middle trying to blast the teeny tiny things that are trying to attack you. And they are small and kind of hard to hit. Other ones react in different ways. Sometimes they circle you. Luckily you have a screen clearing blast, but you can only do this once per level, you know, just like Tempest itself. You could also hold down one of the buttons to move faster back and forth, which you're gonna need if you want to kill everything, but because you have to be so precise, then you're going to have to let off that button in order to get edging just a little bit in order to shoot down your prey. This one is kind of fun for about 5 or 6 minutes and is definitely one of those high score games that you're going to want to keep coming back to. Blitz was the most realistic football game of its time, literally X's versus O's. It was also super violent because the second you tackled someone, they exploded in the tiny little bits. And throwing the ball is kind of fun, although interceptions are really easy to do because there's no real height here to this ball. You just sort of throw it in a straight line. You can control it a little bit to the right or the left, but it's not a magic football here. If you're threw it too far to the left, you can't make it turn back to the right at all. So you might just want to run the ball. However, once you pass the line of scrimmage, then the opponent's people start moving a little bit faster, meaning that you're probably only going to pick up about 3 or 4 times every single run. So you're really going to want to make your passing game on point here. This one is best for 2 players. You could also kick field goals and do some pretty fun punt returns. This is a great game, especially if you have a friend, and it is one I will play any day of the week. Cosmic Chasm's one of the must-haves of the Vectrex, and the emulator does not do it justice. You see, on the map screen, you would actually plot out where you start off this game. Then you would have to remember how to get to the core and then explode the core. You have a shot, you have a thrust, you have a drill that you use to drill through the walls, all while a reactor is ever expanding in your location. If you do happen to make it to the core, then you have to blow the whole thing up, and then you have to remember how you went through the game to make your escape, and then you beat it and start another level that might be even harder. Playing this game in the arcade is almost identical, but they have some color added to it, and it's not nearly as fun because you have to keep on dumping quarters into it. Also, you don't have the drill, instead you have to shoot the walls, and overall, I very much prefer playing this on the Vectrex because it just tends to control quite a bit better, and it also looks just as good. The Fortress of Nazad is also a game you could beat. You have 4 different levels where you have to shoot down everything that's coming at you. It's not going to be easy though, because your bullets act like ping pong balls. Sometimes they'll hit the wall and even reflect back at you and hit you and kill you dead. And these bullets are really fast moving and quite small, meaning that they're going to be kind of hard to see. There's also a little bit of flicker on the screen here, but overall it's definitely a showcase on how the Vectrex could even do sprite scaling to a pretty darn good degree. Just take a look at it. This was done 10 years before the next home console could even think about doing sprite scaling. And there is an end boss to the game, which is definitely something you're going to want to do for yourself. Fortress of Nazad is one of the best Vectrex games. Hyperchase was the only game that actually used the true analog stick, making playing on an emulator nearly impossible. So I'm just sort of showing you how the gameplay was without moving at all. Now, the idea was to race through the countryside and make it there in the fastest possible time. Of course, dying gives you more time, and this is where I would have to keep track of my best times in my little handy dandy notebook. There was another mode here that would just give you a handful of lives and have you race to a certain distance, and when you died, well, then that was your distance that you would write in your notebook. I usually attach the book using Velcro to the side of my Vectrex itself to keep track of all my high scores in all of my games, because the Vectrex didn't have that internal ability to keep track of the high scores. But then again, nothing did at the time. Overall, this is a fairly impressive game to watch someone play, but it is darn near impossible to play it yourself. Mindstorm was the pack-in title for the system. It was kind of like Asteroids. You have a thrust, you have the shot, you have the teleportation button that puts you in a dangerous spot and has you generally blow up, and then sometimes there's a little UFO that comes along and puts more enemies on the screen. Instead of Asteroids having every single thing to blow up on the screen at once, the limitation of the hardware couldn't really allow that, so instead there's little dots all throughout, and when space is freed up as you destroy stuff, well, then more little dots will turn back into the enemies. If you happen to clear the screen of all the enemies and the little dots, you move on. If you clear 13 levels, the game crashes because of a bug, and you can consider yourself the victor. But if you wrote a letter to GEC saying that you wanted more game because, you know, it bugged out on you and crashed, well, then they would send you a copy of Mindstorm 2 for free if you paid the shipping and handling. And then that game today is worth like $2,000, so you just won the lottery for writing a letter. This was definitely one of the best games of its time, and it came for free. Pole Position was an arcade hit, and this is also another one where the emulator doesn't do it justice. It's definitely far easier to play on the Vectrex itself. First, you have to qualify, and then you'll get into the main race. Now, the overall track experience is exactly that of the arcade game, so I wish there was a little map in the corner showing exactly where I was on the track so I can anticipate the corners. Also, this was a pretty much a technical modern marvel, because most of the time, vector graphics could only be displayed in one straight line. But here, the vectors actually curve a little bit to the right and the left, meaning that this is one heck of an impressive game and one heck of a piece of coding. This is something that everyone loves when playing the Vectrex, and is definitely the best race car game of its entire generation. Ripoff is like Guard Duty the game. There's a couple of triangles on the screen that you have to protect, and then some little critters try to come and take them and run away as fast as they can. If they manage to steal all of your triangles, well, it's game over, and you can just look at your high score to see how far you made it in the game. It's a very simple and interesting premise. You also have infinite lives here, so you're encouraged to ram the enemies if you absolutely have to, and just can't get that shot off in time. So do whatever you can to protect your triangles. Also, this is definitely one that is played just as good at home as it was in the arcade. The graphics look nearly identical and the gameplay is spot on with that system. So overall, both versions are terrific, but I'd rather be playing it on the Vectrex. Scramble. Now the Vectrex version is still using that colored overlay to give us some color. In the arcade there was some color, it might have moved a little bit faster, and the missiles that you drop to try and regain fuel seem to be a little bit harder to use. You see here on the Vectrex the game is pretty much the same, and even when you get towards the very end it gets really difficult with having to fly through the tight spaces using the little joystick controller that was on the Vectrex. But when you're a Vectrex master, you'll even land that final shot, letting you move on to the next level, and then the whole game starts anew, only this time it's a little bit harder. There's 3 levels of difficulty here, and if you can beat all 3 of them, then you are the true Vectrex master, and again, this is a perfect arcade experience right in your home. Starhawk's kinda neat. It's meant to look like the trench run of Star Wars, but you have 60 seconds to blow up everything on the screen to get your highest possible score. And then you just try to do the whole thing again and again and again. That's all there is to this entire game. Just a 60-second loop of blowing up your enemies. In the arcade, it was the exact same thing, only sometimes the loop could be a full 2 minutes on a quarter, just blowing up your enemies with the exact same graphics. Overall, this is one that you quickly get bored of in about 60 seconds. Which leads me to Spike. This was the largest official release game that ever came out. You play as a cute little character, Spike, and Molly gets captured by some other stickman. Now you have to maneuver your ladder around the stage, making jumps, meaning that this was an action platformer game. You have to pick up a key to get to the end. There's also a little piece of candy that could be floating down, and getting this candy is definitely something you have to do in upper levels because it pauses the whole screen for a bit period of time, or at least the enemies on the screen. Why was this game so large? But because it had voice synthesis. Spike would say things like, "Spike, Molly, darn it," and other things like that. Spike itself had so much character, he eventually sort of became the mascot for the Vectrex to this very day. And I mean it because people are still making Vectrex games. My 2 favorite are Vector Pilot and a little game of Vector Patrol, which was definitely just Moon Patrol, just done on the Vectrex. They're terrific games, and I recommend everyone still keep on looking for the homebrew Vectrex games because the scene is alive and well, meaning that this console is definitely one of the best and longest lasting consoles to ever exist. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, and the Vectrex itself was so innovative, I actually think that it was sent from the future back to the past to save the whole video game industry. Seriously, I even did a whole video about it, so make sure you click that link and give it a watch. And also, if you happen to see one of these in the wild, make sure you pick it up for yourself because it is definitely one of the best video game experiences ever. So if you have a game you want me to review, or a system that everyone forgot about, make sure you leave me a comment in the comment box down below. And until later, I will see you again, guys.